Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. Recently, the United States has decided to start revoking the visas of Chinese students, including those who are connected to the Chinese government or are studying in key fields. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning responded by saying that the US is using ideology and national security as excuses to unjustifiably cancel the visas of Chinese students. This seriously undermines the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese students and disrupts normal exchanges between the peoples of the two countries. China firmly opposes this and has already lodged representations with the US side. He emphasized that the US's politically discriminatory actions completely expose the hypocrisy of its so-called commitment to freedom and openness, and will only further damage the United States' own international image and national credibility. A Bloomberg reporter pressed further, asking about the US decision to start revoking Chinese students' visas. Does China believe that this decision regarding Chinese student visas will have further impacts on other areas of China-US relations, including China-US trade? Mao Ning responded that regarding China-US relations, China's position has always been consistent. We hope the US side can work together with China and move towards each other. We hope they can do more constructive things and do more things that are beneficial to the healthy, stable, and sustainable development of China-US relations. After the Trump administration in the United States initiated a tariff war against China, one of the most critical countermeasures China could take was to impose export controls on key rare earth products. From small items like smartwatches and mobile phones to large equipment such as medical devices, helicopters, and submarines, all of them contain speakers. And these speakers are mostly powered by rare earth permanent magnets manufactured in China. This was one of China's countermeasures after Trump's reckless tariff increases. Thousands of American speaker manufacturers have had to reconsider their supply chains. According to a previous report by Nikkei Asia, in recent weeks, they have been traveling around Southeast Asia trying to sort out their supply chains. Dan Digre, CEO of American speaker manufacturer MICO, wants the US government to understand two things clearly. Sourcing magnets outside of China is not simple. Tariffs have made it even more difficult to manufacture magnets in the United States. Digre says this is a rather complex technology and also a very specialized one. Based on our experience, we found that suppliers within China are interchangeable, but once you leave China, even if you can get the parts, they are not the same at all. Digre says that many of the company's defense clients do not want any speaker components to come from China. But at this stage, he has to tell them that there are no other options here. In the short term, the only option is to accept a significant degree of Chinese involvement. According to Nikkei Asia Review, the most difficult part of a speaker to replace is probably the magnet. For many devices such as helicopters, submarines, and military headsets, rare earth materials like neodymium iron boron magnets are absolutely essential, because they can reduce the size and weight of the equipment while ensuring the sound quality of the speaker. Digre said that when everyone discusses size, weight, and performance, this is a huge issue. Compared to similar ferrite magnets, neodymium iron boron magnets only require about 1/10 of the material, which means they can reduce the device's weight by 90%. Rare earth magnets have indeed changed the performance of speakers. But after the US imposed tariffs, did China implement retaliatory export controls on various types of rare earths? This has made American buyers anxious. A US company, which claims to produce non-sensitive commercial audio equipment, expressed concerns to foreign media. This company sources magnets containing trace amounts of controlled elements from China for its factories in Europe and Latin America. Because the current export approval process takes at least 45 working days, and the Chinese side requires a guarantee that the products do not contain controlled elements, its overseas assembly lines are now facing inventory shortages. In a statement, the company said that delays in export approval will disrupt production and negatively impact the production plans of downstream automobile manufacturers, including the possibility of production coming to a halt. If the issue remains unresolved for a long time, it will lead to catastrophic financial consequences, including a sharp drop in revenue and a chain reaction of supply chain disruptions. According to Nikkei Asia Review, for now, the situation is relatively fortunate. The magnets they use do not contain dysprosium. They only contain a small amount of materials that are not affected by China's export controls. In mid-April, a batch of goods was successfully shipped out, but the US government's tariff policies are affecting the company's operations in other ways. Digre said that magnets are the most expensive component in speakers, and even if the US can produce alternative magnets in the future, the cost will still be very high. This could lead, in practice, to manufacturers having no choice but to use less than ideal materials to design speakers in order to keep prices down. Misco is exactly the kind of company that Trump claims he hopes will thrive. Among speaker manufacturers, this American manufacturing company is one of the few that still produces in the United States. The factory produces 1 million speakers every year and employs 100 workers, but it still needs to import components from China. Deagle believes that Trump's tariffs have had the opposite effect. Not only do they drive up the cost of essential imported parts, but they also cause more speakers to be produced in China, not fewer. The reason is that goods and components are subject to tariffs every time they cross the US border. Manufacturing in American factories means that every stage of the production process is taxed multiple times, whereas for some products that are entirely made overseas and shipped as finished goods, the tariffs they face are actually lower. Deagle says this makes manufacturers less likely to consider producing in American factories and instead choose to manufacture in Chinese factories. Then they ship them to another factory, or perhaps to a factory in South Korea. After that, the next stage of production takes place. The entire supply chain now seems to be moving out of the United States. This is not an isolated case. According to a survey conducted by CNBC in April, 57% of companies said that high costs would make it difficult to bring manufacturing back to the United States, even if there were real efforts to reshore manufacturing. 81% of companies preferred to automate more jobs rather than hire workers. Slightly over 60% of respondents said that shifting the supply chain to countries with lower tariffs is more cost-effective. Degny said that although the United States and China have recently agreed to a 3-month truce and reduced tariffs, volatility still remains. Last week, Trump said that even after the 90 days are over, if the US and China still cannot reach a long-term agreement, tariffs on China will not just return to 145%, but will increase significantly. DeGray expressed his feelings about what might happen after the 90 days. He said that the company has been established for 75 years, and he himself has been running it for 40 years. We have been through a lot, and we will get through all of this. But as for the trade war, it really is unnecessary. In addition, the high-level China-US economic and trade talks have made a breakthrough, with both sides agreeing to reduce tariffs by 15%. However, CNN noted that China is still strictly controlling rare earth exports, believing that this move is to keep a key bargaining chip for future China-US negotiations, as the impact of China's rare earth export controls quickly becomes apparent. What about the related American companies? They are complaining bitterly, and the US government is also at its wit's end. The report says that after the China-US economic and trade talks, US Trade Representative Greer tried to ease industry concerns about this potential vulnerability, claiming that China was expected to lift the export restrictions. However, so far, there has been almost no sign of this. On the contrary, many experts and industry insiders believe that China seems to be stepping up enforcement and increasing regulatory oversight. John Cacavio, president of a Canadian industry consulting firm, said that if what Greer expressed was merely a hope rather than the actual outcome of the negotiations, they would be surprised. He believes that the purpose of China's controls is to ensure that there will be no shortages in domestic demand. Grace Lynn Bhaskaran, director of the Critical Mineral Security Project at the International Research Center in the United States, believes that some level of control will continue to exist and may persist for a long time. This will allow China to retain leverage in future trade negotiations with the United States. Bhaskaran further explained that if the United States changes its mind and goes against its tariff policies, China can easily refuse to issue the necessary permits. She added that China's export control system is, by design, a licensing regime that is dynamic, allowing China to decide at any time which companies or countries can obtain rare earth minerals and magnets. The report mentioned that China has recently started issuing rare earth export licenses. Experts say this development indicates that the new licensing system has already been launched and is in operation. Furthermore, the restrictions would not be relaxed, according to 2 manufacturers who told CNN that they had obtained permits. It was revealed that approval is granted based on a batch-by-batch pricing regulation, which means that each shipment requires a new permit and permits cannot be reused. One of the companies said they received the first batch of export permits for Southeast Asia, and afterwards they obtained several permits for exports to Europe. These include permits for exports to German automaker Volkswagen, According to CNN, under the new regulations, exporters must provide information about the end user in their applications. It can take up to 45 working days for an application to be approved. This rule allows China to track the final destination of rare earth magnets. James Kennedy, president of the American rare earth consulting firm Free Consulting, said, "This approach is very smart. It allows them to clearly know what you are doing. Companies can still obtain these materials, but you must fill out the paperwork and inform China who the end user is. You have to provide all this information. Then China will be able to understand your downstream customer base and use this information to look for further loopholes." Bhaskaran said that China has currently removed 28 US-based companies from its export control list, which means these companies are no longer prohibited from obtaining dual-use materials from China, and their suppliers can now apply for rare earth magnet export licenses. However, whether China will ultimately grant licenses to US defense companies remains to be seen. Thomas Krummer, head of Singapore mineral and metal supply chain company GITI, also believes that China's rare earth export controls are specifically aimed at targeting the US defense industry, saying he can't imagine China giving up on this policy. Bhaskaran, who became wealthy in the US, mentioned that China has issued the first batch of rare earth export licenses to the public. This sends a sharp geopolitical message. Speculation has it that Germany is currently at the peak of geopolitical confrontation, and the United States is dissatisfied with the friendly relations between China and Germany. Therefore, by issuing one of the first licenses to Germany, China is sending a very positive signal for China-Germany relations. In an era when relations between the world's two major geopolitical superpowers are growing increasingly tense, the licensing system may continue to serve as a tool, an even more powerful form of leverage. To sum up a few observations. First, China's new regulations on rare earth exports are extremely detailed, but they are not arbitrary. Instead, they are clear guidelines, making it even harder to smuggle rare earths to the United States. Recently, the Ministry of Commerce has also led several departments in launching a crackdown on domestic companies involved in smuggling. Second, in the past, when Biden used a superficially polite approach, he would mobilize Western media to criticize China's controls as authoritarian. Now, compared to Trump's forceful and aggressive tactics, China's approach is orderly and follows established rules, making it much more predictable, so there's less noise from critics. Third, in fact, European and American countries have been strictly reviewing dual-use civil aviation exports for many years, requiring each application to clearly state the end user, and even details like the end user's ownership structure and parent company. China has long been subject to such scrutiny from the US and the West, so naturally, a good teacher produces capable students.